All
Okay,
right.
we're good to go.
Thank you, Joe.
Yes, ma'am.
At 5 o'clock, we are calling to, or maybe it's 5:01, calling to order the, what's today, November 4th meeting of the Quality of Life Committee. Can I get a roll call, please, Jennifer?
Yes, you may. Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Here.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Present.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Here.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Present.
And Chair Carol Romero-Worth.
I am here. With that, we'll move on. Are there changes to the agenda tonight, Jennifer?
No, there is not.
Okay, great. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
And can we get a roll call on approval of the agenda, please?
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
And Chair Carol Romero-Worth.
Yes. All right, then on to the approval of the consent agenda. Are there items the committee would like to discuss tonight? And hold on, I haven't got my little blue hand thing up here. There we go. Councillor Cassett Sanchez, sorry about that.
Yes, item H.
H?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Villarreal.
Question on item F as in Frank and H to discuss amendments.
Okay, great. Anybody else? All righty, can we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Is there a
Second.
second? Second from Councillor Cassett Sanchez. Roll call, please, Jennifer.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Chair Carol Romero-Worth.
Yes. All right, moving on then to the approval of the minutes for October 21st. Are there any changes to the minutes from the committee or from staff?
None from me.
To approve.
Move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
And we need one more roll call, please.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Chair Carol Romero-Worth.
Yes. All right. And with that, we will move on to presentations. Marisol Atkins, are you on the line? There you are. Fabulous. All right. So I just want to give a little preview. I spoke about this at the Finance Committee meeting earlier this week. And I wanted just to let everybody know that this is the first of what I would consider several months, maybe 4 to 5 months worth of presentations centered around housing and housing issues in the city of Santa Fe. We have been planning out, we've been meeting with staff and with advocates, and we've been talking about how to shape these agendas over the next 4 to 5 months. And with the purpose of really getting a sense of what is happening in our city around housing. We know we struggle with particularly affordable housing. We know we have been working on this in the last few years, and we're going to hear exactly what the city has been doing, and we're going to hear about things that are coming down the pipeline in terms of more things that we can do to address this issue. And we'll be hearing from staff about plans at the city. We'll be hearing from advocates and really focusing as a committee on the issue of housing and all the spectrum of I don't know, need and things that we can do to address the issue. So tonight I'm excited to get this Santa Fe homeless and housing interim needs report that Marisol has been working on. And I think it'll give us a good sense of what we're looking at in this community. And it'll help, I hope, provide some context for the next presentation about how we can use some of the CARES Act to address affordable housing in Santa Fe. So with that, Marisol, I think, and I don't know, is Kira going to join you, or you're solo?
Kira is always welcome to join me.
Okay.
She's there, and feel free to chime in at any point, Kira.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, Chair and Counselors, and Marisol for being here. Just to put a little context for this, the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness contracted with Marisol Atkins with the ability to do so was made possible by a generous contribution from Ancorum Foundation. And it's really encouraging that the local foundations are taking a strong interest in this issue that the city's been working on for quite a while. So Marisol doesn't need any help from me because she's created an incredible comprehensive report. So I'll want to give the floor to her to let her give you what she's put together.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation. And Councilor Villarreal, I apologize for a repeat from last week, in large part from the group last week. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And just to let you all know, if at any point you have questions, please speak up. It'll be hard for me to see if you do a hand raise while I'm sharing the slides, but if you want to just unmute yourself and speak up, I'm happy to have dialogue throughout the presentation. So let me just do this. So this presentation is a summary of a larger report that I completed last month. I believe each of you have received a copy of that report, and if not, I think Jennifer has that and can share with the group. Again, my name is Marisol Atkins, and I was contracted by the New Mexico Coalition to put together, to put together a report based on interest in knowing about the comprehensive needs of the housing and homelessness community here in New Mexico. Please forgive me, I just realized I had the wrong presentation up. Too many presentations, too little time, my apologies. So here we go. Again, as Kira mentioned, this report and the work following is made possible in part from support from Ancorum St. Vincent, the McCune Foundation, and Santa Fe Community Foundation. So initially, these organizations contacted the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness in response to the COVID crisis. All of the organizations mentioned and foundations have been providing support to shelters throughout the community and other housing organizations, specifically in response to COVID. But through the work, they decided to get together and see if they could get a more comprehensive view of what's happening overall and throughout the community, and to see if there are ways that the foundations in particular could collaborate with city, county, state, and federal governments to support initiatives underway. And so again, the three foundations mentioned pooled funds and contracted with the Coalition to End Homelessness to put together the original report that was sent to you previous to the meeting. I want to say that there's been a ton of work going on in the community for a number of years. And so the report, I feel, was really a collective action, and I couldn't have put it together without the support of a number of groups that have been working together and many individuals who have been working on this cause for decades now. So just so that for the process of the report, I interviewed nearly 25 unique individuals and read multiple reports from folks. So I wanted to recognize the work that's been done previous to this most recent report. Housing Action Coalition, Chainbreaker, Consuelo's Place, the Built for Zero Initiative, and the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Task Force from years ago were all contributors to the content of the report. And a lot of good work has been done thus far. In addition, as mentioned, I reviewed a number of different reports that are listed here, again, building upon work that's already been done. And together through this collective effort, we've come up with a vision that's really states that public and private partners work collaboratively with community providers and advocacy groups to ensure that Santa Fe is a place where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring, and that access to safe, affordable, and sustainable housing is a reality for all community members. Strongly, we believe that ending homelessness in Santa Fe is possible through our collective work, good intentions, and strategized plan to move forward together. And again, just really wanting to support the work that's already been done and appreciate the foundation's understanding of the need to partner with existing groups currently addressing this issue. So just to share some of this data, there was some initial data in the report that you may have received, and this slide includes updated data. And let me just preface this with one piece, that there are multiple data platforms that are in the community and collecting data regarding homelessness. And this is both a blessing and a challenge. One of the items we've identified as needing additional support is around streamlining data. So this particular slide includes information from the coordinated entry system at the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness. And I just want to state that there are folks within that are homeless within the community who are not currently captured in this data. And so this is really an underrepresentation of actual need. And as we look at system needs specifically around infrastructure, data sharing and data collection in a more uniform way is one of the issues that we're working on. So as of October 15th, there were 259 total households in the Santa Fe area entered in the coordinated entry system. You can see the breakdown between individuals, families, and youth. And youth in this case are considered those who are 24 and under. Of those 259 households, 182 are deemed chronically homeless. And the definition of chronic homelessness is twofold. It requires, and this is a HUD definition, it requires that an individual be homeless for 12 months, either consecutively or over a 3-month period. And in addition to the 12 months of literal homelessness, there needs to be a diagnosis of a disability, either physical or behavioral disability. In addition to these 259 total households, there are 37 in the coordinated entry system who are identified as being at imminent risk. Again, there are folks staying at shelters and enrolled in other programs in the community that are not currently captured in the coordinated entry system. And so we believe that the actual number of homeless individuals is closer to 420. And just to note as well, both locally and nationally, homelessness is regularly underreported.
Marisol, I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that number. The number you think it is 400 what?
420.
420, thank you.
Yes, and again, we believe that to be an underestimation just because overall there are a number of homelessness is generally underreported in general. And we're working on getting better numbers specific to our community. In addition to the coordinated entry system data, we have information here from the Santa Fe Connect program that I'm sure y'all are familiar with. It's both the city and the county program. We just looking at trends, this particular slide just speaks specifically to July through September of 2020. So there were 239 individuals that requested support specific to housing and shelter. You can see in the breakdown, 115 of those folks needed emergency shelter. Others are looking for permanent housing as well as rent and mortgage payment assistance. In addition to the immediate and existing homeless populations and folks needing supports regarding housing, it's really important to look at the issue of affordable housing, I think as was mentioned earlier. As you can see by this table, and this is a little bit dated information, but in 2018, 96% of our low to moderate income households were determined to be housing burdened, which means that they're paying more than 30% of their monthly income in rent. And so when you look at these numbers here, around 86% of folks who make $50,000 or less, or those who make $35,000 or less, this is really a population that's at imminent risk of homelessness, and even more so during the COVID crisis. And those totals, as you can see, are another about 11,000 households, in addition to those that were already identified as being homeless. Just to give some context on homelessness, it's not, the reasons for homelessness are many. And I think as you're all probably well aware that access to safe, permanent, affordable housing is really a key social determinant of health. If we don't address the foundation of housing, it's hard to address other illnesses and social ills, if you will. Within the homeless population, both here and nationwide, there's a significant overrepresentation of people of color. There are high rates of individuals who have been involved with some type of justice system, be that corrections, child welfare, adult protective services. And so these are vulnerable folks. We have high rates, and we've seen these rates growing over COVID, of individuals who are either experiencing domestic violence currently or who are fleeing domestic violence or with histories of domestic violence. Amongst the folks who are chronically homeless, there's a significant rates of mental illness and co-occurring substance misuse. And trauma really is at the base of so many of these other items that have been discussed. Historical trauma, familial trauma is often pre-existent and then compounded with the experience of homelessness. So in order to have an optimal response system to homelessness, we need these various pieces. And I'll say we have some degree of each of these components in our current system, but not enough. And there may not be as gelled together as we would like them to be. So coordinated entry is really that front door entrance. It allows us, this is currently sitting at the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness, and it's a process by where people are screened and evaluated for current homelessness and categories based on HUD definitions. And so this coordinated entry piece is critical to us as a community, having access to clean data and really having a clear understanding as to actual numbers of households within the community that are either literally homeless or at risk. We need services to preserve folks who are precariously housed and prevent folks from becoming homeless. We need emergency shelters, and at this time, including hotels and motels, given the reduced capacity at the current shelters due to COVID. We need transitional housing opportunities to help folks when they move from shelter to a more permanent supportive situation. And then we need both rapid and permanent supportive housing. And I'll speak a little bit more to these models in slides coming up. Obviously, the ultimate goal is to support folks in becoming self-sufficient. And so supportive services, life skills, education, and employment are critical. And without an umbrella of affordable housing, none of these other programs can really function at capacity, because we need access to affordable housing units to provide these various types of housing programs. So through the research I did in interviewing folks and in reviewing other materials, I really identified current need in these 6 particular categories: preservation and prevention, emergency shelter, actual buildings and housing units, individual and program vouchers, supportive services, and system infrastructures. So again, significant numbers of households in Santa Fe have been rent burdened for many years. This is not a new issue. And due to COVID, many households have been unable to pay their existing rents and mortgages due to loss of employment. So we do need access to programs that help with rental and mortgage arrears. There are funds that are being made available both through the city and the county through CARES Act dollars to help support preservation and prevention. And so we're really working to get the word out about existing resources that are available. We need to prepare as a community to address the impending need once the federal eviction moratorium expires at the end of December. That could greatly increase the numbers of folks at risk of being homeless. And of course, we must identify ways to support local landlords so that they can further support individuals and families being housed. In the area of buildings and housing units, again, there's an extreme lack of affordable housing across the board in our community. We need new development and repurposing of existing buildings for low to moderate income households throughout the community. Transitional, rapid, and permanent supportive housing models can be provided in either single or scattered sites. So when we look at building and housing units, we really need individual units as well as larger units that can run full-on programs. We need to recruit and support private landlords so that they can either bring their units up to standard or help them with costs regarding damage to apartments or housing units from tenants who've been placed in their properties. Local developers have identified a need for long-term financing opportunities, specifically 3-year financing opportunities. And of course, we need to continue advocating for amendments to land use code to incentivize market-based affordability. In the area of individual and program vouchers, we need, again, emergency shelter. In a non-COVID environment, it's believed that with our current shelter capacity, we have sufficient bed nights. However, and let me just say, emergency shelters are really intended to be very short-term stays from 30 to 90 days, during which time assessments and screenings would take, in a perfect world, take place, and efforts would be made to move folks needing immediate shelter into more permanent housing situations. Given the COVID crisis and the reduced capacity within each of the shelters, we're needing additional vouchers for hotels and motels so that people can be safely housed during the winter months. In addition, we need transitional housing, and this model really is, transitional housing is a program that can be from 18 to 24 months. And in this particular model, the lease or the building is held in the name of the provider agency. So let's say Esperanza Shelter decides to lease a building. They would provide transitional housing for 18 to 24 months, but the lease of that building would be in their name, and they would move the residents in there, and they would stay part-time again until they could become self-sufficient and get their own unit. Rapid rehousing is similar to transitional housing. However, in the rapid rehousing model, the lease is held in the name of the tenant. And then the provider agency would provide rent subsidy for 24 to 36 months to help support that tenant in their individual unit. And as the individual household's ability to pay in rent goes up through employment or supportive services, then the program that's providing the rapid rehousing support would be reducing the amount that they're providing each month, with the end goal of the household being able to stay in the particular unit and pay the full rent on their own at the end of a 24 or 36 month stay. And we believe with the current, just existing current homeless households, we would need a minimum of 200 units of rapid rehousing to support the current homeless population in our community. Permanent supportive housing doesn't really have a timeline. This is a program model that's specific to the chronically homeless folks. This, again, it's a longer term housing program, and it includes extensive wraparound services such as behavioral health, case management, life skills. And so this is more of a longer term housing model that's really indicated for folks who have been chronically homeless and who have a qualifying disability such as mental illness or a physical disability. And then, of course, we need access to affordable housing units, minimum 100 new units per year, although preferably 200 to 300. Immediate needs for supportive services really include navigation and case management. I'll just give an example of a couple of the local shelters. One shelter has one case manager for 30 individuals, and another shelter, pre-COVID support dollars, had one case manager for 128 beds. In a really perfect world, there would be one case manager per 10 youth and one per 15 adults. And the case manager really serves as that support liaison to help the individual in need connect with other services such as behavioral health or employment or education. Thankfully, through the generosity of Ankaram and other foundations, we have received some funding to help provide additional case management through the winter, specifically to ensure that the individual households that are placed in motels and hotels throughout the community are getting daily visits from a staff member from one of our local organizations. This not only helps support the individual to maintain shelter within the hotel, but it also helps support the relationships between the hotel owners and the individuals that are being sheltered there in hotels during the current crisis. Of course, behavioral health, medical services, employment, and these other supportive services are critical to moving individuals and families from homelessness to self-sufficiency. And finally, we really need significant infrastructure around coordination and alignment. I've said this in a couple different metaphors I like to use, but one is the quilt. I see that we have a lot of the patchwork for the quilt, but we need the golden thread to help bring all of these different pieces of the housing continuum together in a systemic way that really maximizes efficiencies and current resources. In order to do that, we need better participation in the coordinated entry system. As I mentioned, that really is the system that's set up to track data and really help see movement throughout the system. But not all of the community providers are currently utilizing the coordinated entry system. So we need additional support to ensure that all programs in the community are participating in coordinated entry. Some of that as well, mainly with federal funding programs for housing, longer term housing vouchers outside of emergency shelter. There's a significant amount of documentation that's required. And it takes a lot of time to help individuals gather all the required documentation that's necessary in order to get folks enrolled in longer term housing programs such as rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. We need unified data platforms and further support with working closely with landlords throughout the system. Currently, each of the housing organizations is doing their own outreach to hotels and motels and landlords in the community, and it would be great to have a system hub or a system point person or people who could really take note of current inventory both within hotels and within apartment and housing complexes throughout the community. And finally, flexible funds. While there are a number of funding sources, federal, city, and county, as well as state, a lot of these funding sources are tied to strict regulations, and oftentimes having access to flex funds makes all the difference in really helping someone move quickly through an experience of homelessness. So again, in addition to the report, we had a community-wide collaborative strategic planning meeting on October 16th. We've received a lot of positive feedback. A number of you who are, well, a couple of you who are on this call now were present for that meeting. We had nearly 50 representatives throughout the community present, and we've received positive feedback from that. So we're working to replicate that meeting structure for at least the next 3 months. We had a large group meeting, and then we broke out into working groups based on the 6 areas of identified need that I spoke to previously. Through that work, we've developed a collaborative strategy for a long-term coordinated housing system document. I'm sorry, that's a mouthful. But in each of those 6 areas of need, we've identified one goal for year 1 and a number of actions that are being worked on or desired to be worked on over the course of the next year. We're going to continue to review data across platforms and programs so that we can get a better sense of actual need. And of course, we're going to support the immediate needs of the most vulnerable residents through these winter months. Through the collaborative work, we're also really trying to see what's the best structure. I think as Kira and others can attest, in any one week, there can be 6 to 8 meetings on housing. And so we're really looking to see how can we put a structure in place that maximizes people's time and expertise, and that really builds upon local experience and identification of need. As I mentioned, I interviewed close to 25 individuals, and by no means am I the guru on housing. I think my role here really is just to bring various pieces together and put things together in a collective manner. But I will say that we have just a number of local individuals and organizations who really are experts in their particular areas. And I think if we could really maximize individual passion, expertise, and experience and bring it together in a collective package, we really do have the foundation for ending homelessness in Santa Fe. And just finally, for consideration, I think in the system infrastructure groups, we're really looking at the need to further explore long-term affordable housing funding through revenue sources that are permanent and stable. And I know that the city of Santa Fe has a affordable housing trust fund, and the county of Santa Fe County is working on establishing an affordable housing trust fund. To really have an optimal system, we need to have $3 to $5 million per year in these trust funds to be able to meet the needs, both current and impending. We need the permanent and dedicated funding source. I think we're trying to pick and pull from different places, but knowing that we as a community have a committed and stable source of funding to address housing needs over the next 3 to 5 years would be huge in helping the planning activities. These funds obviously provide for flexibility and local control so that we can use the local funds to supplement as state and federal dollars become available or shift over time. Having a local fund helps to provide supports for households who may not qualify for federal or state funded programs due to immigration status or other conditions. And it really, it really helps leverage local investment to secure a longer term strategy and to address areas that are not currently being met with existing resources. So with that, I think what I've really learned through this process is that we are stronger together. In times of crisis, the wise build bridges, as was stated in the Black Panther movie. And I think we're moving toward that as a group. And I'm just very grateful for all of the input and willingness to continue moving forward together. That's been illustrated by a number of folks working with the city as well as the foundations and local providers throughout the community. So are there questions, comments? I'm sorry to rush through, but I welcome any questions, comments, or areas of clarification if you're interested.
Thank you, Marisol, for that presentation. I think that gives us a great overview and context. Questions from the committee on this presentation? Councilor Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick one, Marisol, about we've heard a lot lately about the Built for Zero, and I'm not sure if I heard you mention anything about it, but are you working with that model as well? Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I mentioned it early on, but didn't get into it too detailed. But yes, this effort that I just presented on is really building upon the Built for Zero work and again, work that's been done throughout the community. We're meeting on a regular basis, and a lot of the recommendations actually that came forward in this report around system infrastructure, specifically around unified data gathering, is really built upon the Built for Zero model. One of the, and Kira, jump in as you'd like, but one of the foundational pieces of Built for Zero is the ability to develop a by name list so that we actually have a list of by name of individual households within the community that are currently homeless and needing support, and then helping to move one by one each of those households into more permanent housing settings. Community Solutions is a national organization, I believe, that's working with the Built for Zero team here in Santa Fe. And they've been providing a lot of expertise for this group, and they're participating in these collaborative working groups and the collective strategy planning that we're working on here. And they've been a huge resource as we move this work forward.
All right, and do you think in your studies or your questions of members in the community that there are people out there that prefer to be homeless and aren't looking for a home? And do you know what percentage that might be?
I would say yes, that is the case. There are definitely folks who choose not to be housed. In terms of numbers, I don't know the exact numbers. That'd be hard to estimate at this time. And again, like I mentioned, I mean, housing is a choice, and so we have to honor where people are and what their personal desires are. In addition to the shelter, there are definitely folks, and this is another piece that came up as we met last week, but for those folks who choose not to be sheltered and housed at this time, the various shelters are working together to ensure that there are sleeping bags and tents and things that are made available for folks who choose to remain homeless. In terms of numbers, I really couldn't tell you that at this point. One of the things that we're looking to strengthen within the system is street outreach, which is really actively seeking folks who are currently homeless, who may not be in the system. And I don't want to say there's street outreach is not currently taking place, but I don't think it's taking place in the way in which the Built for Zero model and others would like it to be taking place. And that's one of the things that we're looking to strengthen. I think with the implementation of the mobile hygiene unit, we're trying to tie those pieces up, and through those street outreach and mobile hygiene unit, we may be able to get better data around who are the individuals currently living on the streets who choose to live on the streets, so who may simply want to come and receive a meal or take a shower. And I think as those plans get further implemented, we may be able to gather, the hope is that we'll gather more data on those particular individuals.
Good, thank you. And thank you for your presentation.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? I have just two quick things. You said that the county was creating an affordable housing trust fund and that we need something around $3 to $5 million per year in kind of steady funding stream. Curious if that's city and county combined or to each.
To each.
Okay.
I think that the 3 million is the number really that the city is looking to have as being in need. And then the county, they have not yet established that fund, but they're working on that and have plans for that over the next year. And they have a goal of 5 million. And again, there's a number of different ways that funds can be generated for that particular housing trust fund in both the city and the county. But yes, as you can see, the need is huge, and I'm sorry to be so direct, but I think the issue of housing, while efforts have taken place, it's really been neglected for a couple of decades in the community. These issues, especially around affordable housing, have been present for a long time. And, in interviewing the various folks, they seem a little bit depleted and feeling defeated, as though nothing's going to change. I know 20 years ago, when I came back to New Mexico, big statewide gaps analysis had been completed. And at that time, the 3 top priorities identified were housing, transportation, and behavioral health. Fast forward 20 years, we do another gaps analysis. The 3 things that are needed are housing, transportation, and behavioral health. So however, I am hopeful. And I think the one thing, the silver lining in this awful pandemic is that in the 20 years I've been here working in social services, I've not seen this level of interest and intention and collaboration around addressing the housing crisis. And so I'm hopeful that this may be our opportunity to move things forward. So long answer, yes, 3 million and 5 million.
Great, because the last numbers I had were 1 and 2, so it's nice to have an updated number. Just real quick, and then we do have to move on. When you look at people who don't want to be housed, does anybody do any, I don't know what, for lack of a better word, interviewing of why they prefer not to be housed? I mean, maybe they have, I'm just guessing, a sense about what that would mean, and if you could meet them on their terms, maybe they see the benefit of being housed. So, I know that when they go to shelters, there are a lot of rules. Maybe they chafe under that, and if they understood that there was some way to meet their needs in a way that was acceptable to them, they might choose a different path. Just curious if part of the work that's done gets into why people think they don't want to be housed.
And, I think the key to moving someone from not wanting to be housed to being housed really is relationships, right? And trust. And I would say the main reason folks choose not to be housed is because they're fearful and they don't trust in the system and a landlord. I have one example that's super recent. A woman, an elderly woman who's been living in her van for a long time, and she's been offered housing, and she's fearful of it. She doesn't trust. She's afraid of what might happen to her if she goes into a shelter, and rightfully so, especially for women. I think shelters are not always the safest place. However, in this particular woman, she's been offered extensive supports, but what's been happening with her is that an individual at one of the organizations has been in touch with her and building a relationship with her over the years. Her van broke down. She was trapped in a parking lot that was really scary for her, and more people were starting to come to that. And so what the staff member did was raise money to buy her a new van. And she got a new van last week, and that's where she chooses to live. So it really,
Makes sense.
it is about individual choice, but like I said, and that's again where those flex dollars are critical. So, a lot of the federal and government dollars are specific to housing, but somebody's house may be their van, and that's how they choose to live. And so being able to furnish this woman with a new van that's mobile and she's indicated she feels safer living in her van than in a shelter or in another unit.
Okay, thank you.
It's really stemmed in fear and mistrust.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, well, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your work. I do think we have been doing some things at the city. I think, as you say, there's a lot of focus and attention and willingness to try to do more. So I appreciate all the work that you're putting in, and thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. And just want to give a shout out to Kira. She's done an excellent job in really working with the foundations. It was in large part, and Alexandra, there you are, in large part due to their leadership. These various foundations are getting into the mix and are wanting to help support. And so you have excellent staff at the city whose passion and expertise and will are very apparent. So just shout out and thank you.
Thank
If
you.
you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all for your hard work.
Great, thank you. Thanks for being here. With that, we're going to move on to our next presentation, a discussion on proposed use of CARES Act funds for an extended stay hotel property to be owned and operated by the Housing Trust. And tonight we have Alexandra Ladd joining us, and I believe Kira is still with us. Yes, you are. There you are. And I don't know which one of you wants to start this off. Alex, I know you've been at the front of this, and actually you're noted on the agenda as being the person to tell us about this project. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. I'll share my screen. We put together a slide deck because we've a little bit more engaging than yet another memo for you guys to have to read. So let me get that going. All right. Can everybody see the title slide? Great. So I'm going to read this subtitle, and then I promise I won't read any other text on the slides after that. But I think this is really important. We are supporting this project because we believe that the purchase of an underused hotel motel property to keep our population safe during the pandemic is also the first step toward ending housing instability in Santa Fe. And I want to emphasize that it's a step. It's not going to solve the whole problem, but what I'm going to talk about tonight is a model for really creating an entire approach and business model for doing these kinds of projects and really addressing the needs of the folks that Marisol was talking about, as well as people in our workforce who just can't compete in our housing market. And Marisol's report goes into all of this. I won't even repeat some of this data, but I think all of you have a very clear idea of the need, the severity of what we're looking at here. And we really don't know what it's going to look like in 3 months or 6 months or a year. There's a picture of the Midtown Shelter here because I wanted to point out, and this is really a testament to Regina Wheeler and Kira Ochoa and a lot of other dedicated city staff people, that we were able to create a homeless shelter on one of our properties, and it happened almost overnight. And as a result of that action, and this is something people have been saying to me for years, like, use the dorms at the campus to house people. And I was, no, that'll never work. Well, it is working. And what it has meant for the Santa Fe for our community is that we have not had an outbreak of COVID in our homeless population or in the population of people who are living in congregate situations. It's happened in Albuquerque, it's happened lots of other places. And so that experience has taught us that this is the first step to addressing all of the needs of these populations who are not stably housed or housed at all. So the concept behind this project is to buy this motel property, convert about 70%, the majority of the units, for people in the workforce or unemployed or facing other needs related to not having enough income because of the pandemic, with the remaining units set aside specifically for people transitioning out of homelessness or who are very precariously housed. So I want to emphasize it's not a homeless shelter. This is permanent supportive housing. These people will have their own small apartment unit as a result of living here. The other important piece to this, and Marisol talked a little bit about the coordinated entry system, which is part of the Built for Zero approach to ending homelessness, and we are in the process of continuing to implement it here. But this connects actual housing units to that system, because it's all very well to track somebody and to make sure they get the right referrals to different service providers in a network. But if they're not ending up in housing, then we haven't actually solved the problem. So that's another really important piece to this. And the last point I want to make is that we've got some amazing service providers here. We've got some amazing housing providers. And what we are seeing increasingly is that, and this is especially, you hear these stories all the time, people have been on the waiting list for a public housing voucher for years. They finally get it and they cannot find a unit to live in. And so creating these units, converting these units means that it improves the efficacy of all of our housing providers and the use of subsidy in our community. So what we're also proposing, this is a business model. This is not charity. This is not something that's just going to suck government resources and subsidy from now until the cows come home every single year, need another infusion of support. This is a business model. This is intended to support itself. And there are it's sort of a three-legged stool here. There's a lot of attention paid to the tenanting process, which is how tenants are brought into the property. Many of them who are entered into the coordinated entry system will be brought in that way. Other people will be referred from service providers or find the housing on their own. But the really important point here is that once that the barriers to entry are lowered, because that's traditionally been another problem really with deeply subsidized affordable housing, especially serving more difficult to serve populations or people with higher needs, is that there are high barriers to entry. And sometimes there are things like, well, you have to be sober to live here. Well, if you've been living on the streets for years and living in fear and trauma and addiction, like that's a pretty high barrier to entry. So that's another piece to this that's very important, is that it's a lower barrier to entry, but that's the flip side of that is there are very, very high level of support services and standards once the person is housed. And again, so then the next leg of the stool would be the management, which is not only about managing the physical building, which is what property management is about, making sure the faucets aren't leaking and collecting rent checks, but really the most important piece is managing the services that are available and go with each tenant. The other piece to that management is coordinating the services that are provided on site through different service providers throughout the whole network within the community. Also tracking data and figuring out what interventions work best to result in the most positive outcomes, and that might be customized per tenant. And I think the other issue too is, we hear this as well, really controlling access. So people who need a lot of supervision and really need eyes to know where they are and when they're coming and going, that is provided within this kind of property. And then the third leg on the stool are really building on the strengths of all of the community partnerships. So the partners in this business model, there's a local project sponsor who owns and coordinates the services and manages the tenants on the site. Community Solutions, which acts as co-developer. Community Solutions is a national nonprofit that has created and mobilized these projects in many different communities. And they're providing, it's a technical assistance team, but they're also underwriting the project. They're figuring out how to finance it, and then really trying to make that link between the units and the coordinated entry system, which is, again, part of the Built for Zero approach. And then we have social impact investors. So this is not something you see usually in an affordable housing project. I think you'll start to see it more and more, but these are investors who are willing to provide equity to the project in turn for a smaller return than they would get if they were investing in other types of investments, but they're doing that because they want to have a positive social impact. They're willing to take a smaller return on their investment to know that they are actually doing something good for the community. And once that equity is paid back, it becomes part of the part of the asset. It adds to the value of the property. The city of Santa Fe has a big role. Right, as we've been discussing, we're leveraging CARES Act funds, both from the state of New Mexico as well as our local CDBG, Community Development Block Grant entitlement. And why we're doing that is because we're trying to bring down the amount of debt that's required to buy the property. Because with less debt, more operating revenue can go back into the property to support those robust services that make this model successful. And then, of course, again, we've talked about this before, all of the other private and public stakeholders and community partners. So the project itself is 122 studio units, and it's a very great central location. 42 units are set aside for those in the workforce whose incomes are reduced because of the pandemic, or whose health needs have been amplified because of the pandemic. And another 40 units or so will be reserved for renters with low incomes who may be employed but are not able to participate in Santa Fe's housing marketplace. And those two numbers will probably end up being a little bit fluid. So we'll have, more workforce renters at one point and more subsidized renters at another point. But they are distinct. Populations to be served. And then the remaining 40 units are dedicated to Santa Fe's chronic and veteran homeless, where they can receive that intensive case management and healthcare and counseling and have all of their needs met in line with their housing. So here's, and not just to give you an idea of the unit breakdown and the percentage of units dedicated to each use and what the rents look like. So you're probably looking at this thinking, oh my gosh, those poor veterans, you're charging them this higher rent than anybody else. And that is because these veterans will come to these units with VASH vouchers, which is provided by HUD specifically for veterans. And that number is the fair market rent, which HUD allows the provider to charge the renter, but the renter's only paying 1/3 of their income for their portion of the rent. So they are not paying $840. And just to put it into context, right now, these units are rented in the market for about $1,200 a month. And then you can see what that adds up to in terms of the annual rent income for the project. Couple of examples of projects that Community Solutions has worked on in other places. The one on the right, I believe, was new construction. It's pretty amazing looking. Can you imagine what the historic review board would do if we built something like that in Santa Fe? I love it. I think it's pretty awesome. But the Abrigo Apartments is sort of a similar kind of conversion from a an unsubsidized use to this very affordable model. And then what does supportive housing look like in Santa Fe? These are just two of several examples that we have. But I wanted to point them out because they are both serving populations that would be similar to the ones served at our project. And the one on the left is the Stagecoach Apartments. And the one on the right is Casa Cerrillos, which is currently owned and operated by St. Elizabeth's Shelter. And with that, I will stand for questions. I'm happy to have any more detailed conversation.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to find my cursor again so that I could unmute my button. Thank you. Thank you for helping us understand what this project is and what it isn't. I think that helps quite a bit. And I would refer to the committee. I see Councilor Rivera has his hand up with a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Alex, for a great presentation. You said this money can come from CARES Act funding. Can you talk about that a little bit more? And if it does, how soon does it need to be spent?
That's a great question. So the CARES Act funding that's coming through the DFA, through the state of New Mexico, the feds have put a December 30th deadline to spend it. We are working diligently with Community Solutions, and they are confident that this sale could be closed by mid-December. We would then immediately put the property in use in order to get the eligibility for the reimbursement. But there's another, it's confusing. Because of our CDBG entitlement, HUD also granted us additional CARES Act funds that are coming from the Department of HUD. And HUD has not set the December 30th deadline. In fact, we have over 18 months to spend the money coming from HUD. So that would provide an additional $580,000.
And you said these were suites, so I assume they have a kitchen bedroom, or is it just a small like living area with a kitchen built next to it?
Counselor, I have never actually seen the inside of the units. They do have kitchens. Kira, have you seen them? Have you been inside them?
Madam Chair, Counselor, yes, I've actually stayed in them. They are 320 square units on average, or square feet on average, and so it's one studio with kitchenettes, bathrooms, and a little living area and sleeping area.
And have we already done an inspection on them to make sure that they're ready to go? We won't have to do a whole lot of rehab to these suites.
Councilor Rivera, that is exactly one of the appeals of this property, is that it's been quite well maintained. The units are all furnished with household items even. The Community Solutions team right now, as part of the due diligence, they're doing all of those inspections. But the other advantage that I didn't actually put into my presentation, but another asset we have, is that the legislature awarded us $680,000, I believe, to use specifically for physical improvements to the property from the legislature funds. I'm just drawing a blank on, anyway, when the capital improvement funds. So we will be able to make some immediate improvements or take care of any necessary upgrades or repairs.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? All right. Thank you very much for coming tonight, for giving us a better sense of this project. Really appreciate it, and look forward to hearing how it moves forward.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we will move to our consent agenda, and we are going to take item F first, and I believe, getting my notes, Counselor, who pulled that? Counselor Villarreal, you pulled it. A request for the approval on the license agreement in exchange for obligations of licensee for an indefinite term between the City of Santa Fe and the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. Counselor Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we just got the exhibits of what this looked like. There was no Exhibit A in the packet material based on the contract. And so we just got sent that, and I was looking at those. So essentially it's the property or the piece of land that's directly parallel to Guadalupe Street. And so the questions I had, the language for this agreement was confusing to me because it sounded like, yes, we can use this particular piece of land for their staging as they do their construction. But then it talks about an indefinite term between the city and the Department of Cultural Affairs. So essentially, I was trying to figure out two things. One, that indefinite term, does that mean when they restructure that piece of land, it becomes what I saw from the drawing that we just got, vegetation and permanent vegetation and landscaping? So that was one question. The other question was, if this is to move forward, does that prevent any possibility of protection of the current mural, the multicultural mural, or any possibility of either protecting or preserving it or redoing it on that same wall?
Madam Chair, Councillor Villarreal, I'll start with your second question. Because the building is not the city's, we have no ability to control what happens to the mural now or in the future. And this agreement is really just specific to the land, more or less the sidewalk and attendant areas right there on Guadalupe and Garfield, which essentially Garfield extends all the way into the train depot. So what people often think of as the Tomasitas parking lot. Your first question, you are correct. So the initial piece of what this license agreement will allow is the state to use that area for staging throughout the construction and rehabilitation of the existing building and transformation into the Vladum. And then that will be followed up with essentially permanent, sidewalk and attendant landscaping, kind of tied in directly to the design of the Vladum and the Vladum's landscape. We still will retain the sidewalk and the standard right-of-ways. They'll just be improved by the work that the Department of Cultural Affairs is doing.
Thank you, Sam. So when you say attendant landscaping, does that mean they would control that area and therefore into the future maintain it, and we wouldn't have any responsibility of that area other than as it relates to the sidewalk and street related connections? Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Councillor, that is my understanding, but because it is not explicitly stated, I would like to verify that and provide you a response tomorrow.
So we're not sure if we'd have to be responsible for the maintenance of that.
So my understanding would be, is that we would remain responsible for, standard maintenance of the sidewalk, which is something we already do. But there has been no request that we would maintain anything outside of what we already do. So it logically follows that no, we would assume no additional responsibility, but that has never been explicitly stated to me. So I would hate to state that to you and be mistaken.
Okay, that probably needs to be explicitly stated somewhere in the contract. I don't know where it would be. That was a very extensive, and that contract didn't make any sense. The second part of it didn't make sense to me. It almost wasn't pertinent to our role in this relationship. So if maybe we could clarify that piece.
Absolutely.
And then, I'm still going back to the mural piece, and I know that we don't have any ability to control the mural and the process or the potential or lack thereof for protection or trying to reimagine how that could be. It's just that if we then give up that piece of control, then that could, I guess I'm just trying to see if there's a connection between what could possibly be done and our role in it. And then giving that space up would mean that there would be no potential for having any kind of more dialogue about the mural, even though we're not the main person in that. But I guess I'm just trying to see if there's a connection.
Sorry, Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I just wanted to clarify one portion of what you had asked. Under Section 10, obligations of the licensee, there are 4 basic bullet points that talk about the responsibilities of licensee. And 1C is licensee shall keep the premises clean and maintained. So it will be the responsibility of the state to maintain those premises and areas. So I just wanted to clarify that. I apologize for interjecting when you were asking about the mural.
So they're in charge of maintaining it, but we still have ownership of that portion of land, correct?
Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes, we still own it, but because it'll be in an easement that goes, or a license, I apologize, that goes to the state, they will be in charge of making sure that anything that's constructed or built has to go through a building permit process, that they will maintain and keep that clean, and that the premise is subject to any easements, utility easements, or rights in there. So if there are rights of way or anything like that, or utilities in there, we can access it, but they're going to be maintaining it for the duration of this license.
Okay. So is this the cleanest way to do this versus, I don't know what other option, sale of that? You know how we have these portions of land and rights of way in other places that we end up selling because there isn't a particular use for us to be part of that relationship anymore. So I'm just wondering why we decided to pick this route versus trying to sell it, or is it because we're working with the state entity, or what makes this unique?
Andrea, you may be able to better speak to that than me.
Yeah, Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I believe the reason we decided to move forward with a license is due to the right-of-way, the sidewalks, and the entry points. The city wants to maintain the ability to utilize those and to have the right-of-way access, but they do understand that the state has this vision to build this museum out, and so it moved forward as a license rather than a sale due to the right-of-way, the existing right-of-way and sidewalks.
And it looks like from the graphic, I can't really tell, but the property line is pretty close to the sidewalk, and then it triangles down, and then that area would then become, I think, vegetation. I can't tell. It says Guadalupe Triangle. Do you know what that is?
Madam Chair, Councilor, yes, some changes attendant with the Vladum is actually the sidewalk headed back from Guadalupe towards the train depot will become a little wider. They're planning to take down the existing utility poles there and run those underground. So some configurational changes that way. And then also there's going to be a loading dock at the back of the museum, kind of right in a little nook directly between the Vladum and the train depot. So that sidewalk going back towards the depot will remain a sidewalk. It'll be improved by the state in conjunction with the Vladum. And yeah, so it serves multiple purposes. Pedestrian way, and then also access to the back of the building for loading purposes.
Okay. So in this case, are we specifically just talking about the Garfield Street right of way and its connection to Guadalupe, and not necessarily what's parallel to Guadalupe Street? I'm still trying to figure out where exactly I kept thinking it was what I called kind of more of the triangle right away, right parallel to Guadalupe, where it looks like vegetation, but maybe I'm wrong.
We'll look at the picture. So yes,
The Grove Terrace.
Madam Chair, Councilor. So the area right behind the biker in the rendering provided by the architect, there's a few trees, some people standing in front of a long planter. That is the area being discussed by this license agreement, in this license agreement.
And you sent that to us via email, right?
Correct. And if you wanted to, I could
Yeah.
share it on the screen if it was
That would
helpful.
be helpful.
It looks like it's being shared.
Yes.
think. Yeah, so and I'm going to run my cursor over it. The area being discussed is this corner here, this street right here being Guadalupe. Here, what looks like a street is actually the entry into the train depot / Tomasitas parking lot. And yeah.
Okay, so what we're looking at, where the trees are in those small windows, is the existing wall where the mural is. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, but in this case, this agreement isn't looking at that portion, is it?
No, ma'am. It's predominantly there. It may spill out a little bit in both directions, but predominantly that 5,900 square feet is on the corner of Guadalupe and Garfield Street.
All right, that's super helpful. That totally changes my whole view on this. So, okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Very welcome.
Okay. What's the wishes of the committee on this item?
Madam Chair, move to approve.
Is there a second? I'll second. Jennifer, can you call the roll, please?
Madam Chair, can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Sam, have we spoken with Tomasitas to make sure it's not going to affect their business at all?
Madam Chair, Councilor, to the best of my knowledge, not that I'm aware of, perhaps Andrea is aware of either the city or the state having conversations with them. I would like to say that from a completely kind of nuts and bolts standpoint, since this is not going to actually enter into the parking lot area at all, I think it's highly unlikely that it would, but that doesn't mean that the conversation doesn't have merit on its own.
Chair,
Thank you.
Councilor Rivera, I don't know of any discussions with Tomasitas that we have had, but I would be happy to reach out to the state and find that out for the next meeting.
Okay, that'll be great. Thanks.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Jennifer, can you call the roll on this item, please?
Of course. Councilor Jamie Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, with that, if whoever's sharing the screen can stop, there we go, we're back. Thank you, Sam. We are now on to item H, which is consideration of resolution 2020, a resolution hosting community conversations and establishing a special city committee on cultures, history, art, reconciliation, and truth. It's also been referred to as the chart committee. We have, I don't know, I don't think anybody's presenting on this. The mayor was here. I didn't know if he wanted to say something about it. We do have 1, 2, 3, 4 different amendments on this item. I just will remind the committee that it's 6:20. If each of us talk for 10 minutes on this committee, on this item, we will take this presentation for the next hour. So I just ask that we all be mindful of time. Don't want to, if there are questions, I think some of these amendments, we definitely need to understand better, and there may be other thoughts from the committee about how to move forward, but just want to make us a little bit self-aware about the time that it will take to look into this, and recognize that we can also talk with staff offline as we continue to look at the best way to set up this this particular committee. So I don't know, as a way of process, I think I would entertain a motion to pass this resolution, and then we can go through and talk specifically about any of the amendments that the committee would like to talk about. And then as you probably have noticed, some of these amendments are carried by non-committee members, so any motion to actually act on them would have to be made by a committee member. So
Madam
with
Chair?
that, yes, Councilor Garcia.
I would request we don't move forward with the motion yet. Just, I mean, for example, the prior agenda item we just discussed, we didn't start off with a motion. And I think from historical examples that when we enter into a motion, and especially when we're dealing with amendments, it can get a bit complicated. So I would recommend we discuss first, then we make motions as necessary once I think all the committee members have had opportunity to discuss.
Okay, and I guess I would, just to clarify, we would make the motion to pass the resolution, and then we would take up whatever amendments the committee would like to take up, and we can discuss each of them, or we can discuss some of them, whatever is the interest of the committee, and then take action or not on any of the amendments that are in our packets. So it's actually, I don't know, this is the way we've been doing it at the governing body meeting, and I think.
But we, to that point, we didn't do it with our last agenda item.
No,
if we're
well,
going
our
to carry
last,
consistency,
yeah,
the last
so,
agenda item was with Flood M, and Councilor Villarreal had her questioning with no motion on the table. So I think this, we're picking and choosing, and I'm just going to be calling it out when I see it. We're picking and choosing, and we're pushing through things, forcing them through. And this is an issue that is very, very critical to our city's future. And with that, if we need to go beyond 7 o'clock, we need to do it. I understand we had presentations earlier, which were fantastic, but setting a time limit on an agenda item is unnecessary. I think we need to address the business in front of us. I've mentioned this before in the past, and I will continue to do so. Our committee is here to address work that's before the city, and presentations, I think, come second. And for us to say we get 10 minutes per counselor to talk on this is unsatisfactory. And I understand you set the parameters, Madam Chair, but I think what you are doing is you are setting a very dangerous precedent, and especially on a critical issue like this that deals with not only our history, but our future, and saying we each only have 10 minutes to talk about this. I am completely disappointed in that. So
Okay, so
I'll let
just
you proceed how you want, Madam Chair, but I just wanted to get that off my chest because I think we are completely doing a disservice to our community when we say 10 minutes per person. This is where we are to discuss this. This is the committee process. This is where we're supposed to be making the sausage, so to speak. That way, once it gets to council, the discussions have been had, because there's been discussions at governing body meeting where folks have said, we should have discussed that at committee. Well, that's what we're here for to do tonight.
completely agree. So Counselor, just clarification, I did not set a 10-minute limit. I asked us to be mindful that if each of us spoke for 10 minutes, we would take an hour. I did not set an end time for this committee meeting to be 7 o'clock. It is now, according to my computer, 6:26. So if we each spend 10 minutes talking, we will go well past 7. I'm not setting a limit. I'm just asking us to be mindful of the time that we're taking. Also understanding we have a number of amendments and there is some complexity to them. So again, just asking that we pay attention to that. Now, as for the motion, which was your original concern, this is a different item than item F. Item F was not legislation and was just a licensing agreement. So it's a totally different animal. So with that, I'd be happy to talk to you more about process, and I still would entertain a motion to approve this resolution or disapprove this resolution, and then we can talk about the amendments.
I'll move for approval so we can have discussion on the amendments.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. So with a motion and a second, we can now discuss either the resolution itself or any of the amendments that are in our packet that pertain to this. And again, there are a number of them that are being sponsored by non-committee members who are not here tonight. So if we want to take action on any of those amendments, and even if those folks were here, the motion does have to be made by a committee member. So just want to be clear about that. So with that, are there amendments is there an amendment somebody wants to start with, or conversation about the resolution itself? Councilor Garcia, is your hand a new hand or an old hand?
I think that was an old hand, but I'd be more than happy to discuss. I think all of us have questions, but
okay.
I defer to if any of my other colleagues want to start. I'm more than happy to let them go first.
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So so are we discussing the resolution or the amendments? Because I'm going off of kind of precedent. For example, what went on in Finance Committee, where we solely were talking about the resolution that was in front of us. Then we allowed amendment discussion. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. What are we discussing?
So in finance, I think the item you were referring to is the short-term rental legislation, and we actually did jump right into the amendments. And I think, I'm happy to do either if you have questions.
No, we didn't. We discussed the resolution first, or the ordinance first, and then Councilor Behill-Koppler, myself individually, after you made your motions and approval for the ordinance change, we then each presented our amendments and voted on those separately.
Okay.
Or
it's
motions
all
were presented
recorded.
to me.
It's all recorded, so we can go back.
I just want to make sure I'm germane to the topic.
Yeah, if you want to dive into an amendment, I think that's fine, because I think we've all read the resolution, so.
Well, I think I'd rather talk more about the resolution, and then I'll let some of my colleagues talk about the amendments that have signed on for some of these amendments.
Okay.
And so with that, it talks about listening sessions, and I just want to be clear, and is the sponsor on? Is Mayor Weber on by chance?
Was on, but
because
I don't see him at the moment, so I'm not sure.
Okay, because the way this reads is that the city will convene listening sessions. And so I just want to make that clear, that it is the city per this resolution, the city would take charge of this, not this proposed chart committee.
Yeah,
And
and
that
again,
is,
we don't have the sponsor, so I don't know. We don't really have anybody. Let me see if the mayor's available.
Well, does Pauline know about this by chance?
Chair and Counselor, I'm think it would be a joint effort. So as the chart committee convenes and starts to plan out things, that it would be an implementation jointly.
okay, because on page 1, line 24, it clearly states the city shall convene listening sessions. So from that, if I was a chart committee member and if I was reading that, I would feel that wasn't in my purview and that the city is going to take charge and leadership of that. So if it's going to be the chart committee that's going to work in collaboration with the city of Santa Fe, whether it be city staff, the governing body, whoever it may be, we need to change that and we need to amend that portion of this resolution for clarification. Because right now, the way it reads is that the city is taking charge on that.
Councilor Garcia, where are you looking at that language? Is that in the duties and responsibilities or before?
It's on page 1, line 24.
Mm. And then it says in the duties and responsibilities, and they talk about listening sessions there. So
Right.
I don't know if it contradicts, yeah.
So we just need to clean that up. My next question, and I don't know if this is for the city attorney or who might be able to answer this, but within other committees, and I want to, let's say, for example, and community-led committees, such as the Planning Commission or Historic Review Board, do we determine who the chairs of those bodies are, or do they, as a body, elect their own chair?
I believe my understanding is the mayor has the authority to appoint, and I don't know who appoints the chairs.
Okay, so, but
So that's a
so that
question
doesn't
I
answer my
would
question.
advise you can, I think, have that question answered directly through the city attorney's office.
Okay, so my understanding is, and that's where I wanted it confirmed, and it's unfortunate because this is where we need not only the sponsor but support staff on this for clarification on this resolution, because it's my understanding it's going to go before the Public Works and Utilities Committee once again, and then it goes before governing body. And I think if we don't want to spend hours trying to fine tune this at governing body, I think this is where we needed to get these questions answered. Because
Counselor, if I might, it's also going to finance. Jesse Gillen has his hand out. Jesse, did you have something to add on Counselor Garcia's question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilor Garcia, for the vast majority of committees, the mayor appoints the chair. If there's a vice chair, those are either also appointed by the mayor or the chair, or they're elected by the members. But the chairs are generally chosen by the mayor.
So the Planning Commission chair is chosen by the mayor, not by the body?
As I would have to confirm, but I believe that is correct.
Okay, because I do want that confirmation, because I believe that's not true. The Historic Review Board, is that chair selected by the mayor, or is it community driven or community decided?
Madam Chair, Councilor, if you'd like to give me just a minute, I'll look it up and I can confirm that for you.
Okay, and
Madam Chair, on that point, Councilor Garcia, the chairs of the committees are appointed by the mayor unless the resolution or ordinance establishing the committee specifies otherwise.
Okay, so I think since we're in that, thank you, Councilor Rivera, for that clarification. And since we are somewhat establishing these parameters, I think it's critical that we establish that now. And I would prefer us to move forward with that kind of precedent where the committee itself establishes their chairs instead of it being appointed by the mayor. So I'll be putting forth an amendment on that matter. I believe that the committee they'll be filled with plenty of smart people to determine who they feel they want them to guide them. My next question, and I guess I'll just jump into the amendments that, and this is unfortunate because the mayor's not on board and I'm not able to ask him the question, but in his resolution, he's putting forth that the applicants will be selected by the mayor and the three committee chairs of the governing body committees, Finance Committee, Public Works and Utility Committee, and the chair of this committee, which I absolutely do not agree with. I've said it before and I will say it again. I strongly believe that there needs to be an independent committee that selects the members of this body. We have pretty much lost all credibility with this process, and we need to ensure that our credibility is built back up by having an independent body select who are the participants in this body. We can have an independent body that is made up of the demographics of not only the city of Santa Fe, but our surrounding Indigenous and Pueblo communities. And I believe they would select a strong committee that would lead us into a successful future with this process. So with that, I would not support the mayor's amendment.
Counselor, can I give you a clarification?
Yes.
So the amendment says the three chairs of the city council standing committees and the mayor shall review and evaluate the nominations. I think then from there, the mayor, it's my understanding that it's only the mayor that has the ability to appoint committees. And so I would encourage you to ask your question directly to the city attorney's office. And it doesn't have to be in a meeting. You can get that clarification directly from them. But it's my understanding that only he can appoint the committees, and that he is asking through this amendment, the way it's worded, for the three chairs and the mayor just to review and evaluate, not to actually make those appointments.
On that
Thank
point,
you, Madam Chair. I appreciate. Go ahead, Councilor Villarreal.
thank you.
Actually,
Madam
if I can be in charge of the committee, that would be great. So Councilor Villarreal, yes.
I just wanted to understand something, and the way that reads to me is that those members will help to inform the appointment that then formally is done by the mayor. However, when we did this for the task force, Councilor Rivera and we spent a lot of time reviewing. So of course our input was going to be taken seriously. There's no point in having people be part of that that aren't going to be weighing in and sharing their recommendations that ultimately will lead to an appointment. So I guess I agree with my colleague. I don't see the way that's structured with this amendment as the right approach, because it doesn't reflect the membership of our council or of the governing body. It's predominantly men, and that's not what our council is made up of. So that's one reason why I wouldn't support that amendment. And I would love to hear more about the other amendments, Councilor Garcia, that you're sponsoring, and also co-signed by Councilor Rivera and Councilwoman Vigil Koppler, because those I feel like are pertinent to our conversation and I can support. And I just wanted you to maybe talk through some of them so we can have a better understanding. Thank you.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Councilor Garcia, you still have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilor Villarreal, for your point. I mean, I think it's another perspective is there's no Indigenous representation that's going to be selecting these members, which is a critical component of this committee. So that's an absolute failure. There's no Indigenous representation that's going to select on this committee. And thank you, Madam Chair, for clarifying. I completely understand that this steering committee or community review, they wouldn't be selecting, they would be going through the normal process. similar to any committee where we kind of make the recommendations to the mayor then puts them before us at the governing body, and we ultimately approve. I understand that process. So with that, I think, you know, we need to ensure we're getting this done correctly. And that's where I believe, you know, as I mentioned, the changes that need to be made just in my initial comments, there's many more. And I'll go ahead and pull up per Councilor Villarreal's request of the other amendments. Hold on one second, give me a moment.
Which amendment will you be going to, Counselor? The one that you're sponsoring?
Yeah, I can speak to those.
I mean, again, there are a number here. I just want to make sure we're all on the same amendment with you.
Well, I think there's an amendment sheet that has a list of amendments on that amendment sheet. If I'm not mistaken, that's the way. I think we, in our discussions with Jesse, you know, the way that the process works is we unfortunately have to lump up all of our amendments on one amendment sheet and then make an individual motions to pull and withdraw amendments. That way it doesn't, if somebody doesn't like one amendment, it kills them all. But that's what I'm referring to, Madam Chair.
Actually, Counselor, if I can clarify yet again, there is an amendment here sponsored by, I believe it's you, says here, Counselor Rivera and Counselor Vigil Koppler. There are, I think that amendment, and it's the one that Counselor Villarreal is speaking about, does a number of different things. But then there are two amendments also offered in our packets by Counselor Beta. And then, of course, the one that you've already addressed, which was sponsored by the mayor. So again, I just for clarification, the one you want to talk to now is the one that's being sponsored by yourself, Counselor Rivera, and Counselor Vigil Koppler. Am I correct?
That is correct. And for clarification, Madam Chair, there is 10 changes in this amendment. That was my point, is that if we could have had 10 separate amendments, we probably would have went that route. But per the way we introduced legislation and introduced amendments, we had to include all 10 on one. So that's.
And Counselor Garcia, you actually don't have to do it that way. So
well, that was the guidance we got from Jesse. So that's why it's this way.
Okay. Well,
so the first one says on page 1, after Plaza, we insert the removal of the DeVargas statue because we felt it was relevant to the situation. We wanted to, what's before us that this committee is trying to address is bigger than the removal of the obelisk. And so that's why we made that change. The second one was a simple strike trained and insert mediator dispute resolution training and experience. We felt it was a more holistic versus saying trained. It's somebody that that has a little more experience. We wanted to kind of cover all bases in that sense. And I don't want to potentially jump on in front of Councilor Rivera, and so maybe Councilor Rivera, do you maybe want to speak to any of these that you, since this is something that you, I, and Councilor Councilor Vigil Koppler introduced?
Yeah, you have the floor, Councilor. You're doing a fine job. If you miss something or I feel like I need to add in, I can comment on that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. The third one was we wanted to once again make sure that there was a time frame. I think that's been a big concern of the community, is that because the initial time frame of this chart committee, it would wrap up at the end of 2022, and we want the community to understand that we want to address certain things in a quicker manner, because the chart committee is not solely going to be addressing monuments, statues, that type of scenario. It's bigger than that. And so that's why we've got the proposed 2-year time frame. With this number 3 in this amendment, what we're hoping is we set a time frame for us to have this proposed committee establish what do we do with things like the obelisk or the De Vargas statue, or any other statue that our community feels needs to be addressed in some manner. And so that's why we put some type of time frame on it. Let's see, page 2, line 23, 24. Sorry, I'm just going to be jumping back and forth just so I ensure that I cover these all. '23, '24. Let's see. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to.
Maybe, Counselor, you could just speak generally to what these changes do, because some of them are technical things like renumbering.
Some are technical, but some are changing the demographics and makeup of the body.
Correct.
There were some instances, and let me see. I can't remember if it was in this one. I think it was, because the way these amendments are, it's hard to kind of go without going back and forth. I know one was we had a makeup of the body with 2 elected officials. And I think the reasoning behind that was former elected officials, city Santa Fe elected officials. And the reasoning was that way this individual would have an understanding of the political process, how the city government works, to be able to provide that perspective to the committee. We felt I know that us 3 at least minimum felt that 1 was sufficient. I think there was maybe an understanding that this committee is at 21 is very large, and we were doing everything we can to try to minimize that. We want to ensure that we are being very inclusive with this process, and we need to ensure that there are certain perspectives and experience needed for this. But is 21 the appropriate number? Probably not. I mean, I wish we can dwindle it down to 9 members, such as our governing body size. But given what we're trying to accomplish with this committee, I think that's our challenge. The challenge we're running into. We want to ensure there's certain level of expertise that are guaranteed, and we're not relying that these expertise come in the subcommittee process. Let's see. I'll go ahead and yield the floor. Let me jump back and forth because a lot of it is changing this and that, and I want to make sure to provide the appropriate context for this. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll go ahead and yield the floor.
Yeah, maybe I can help you. So on the membership of the committee, you're switching the membership from 21 to 19 members. That's one change that's in here. Did you want to speak to that?
Sure, Madam Chair. I mean, I think that I said it earlier, we felt there was way too many members on this committee. And given some of the other proposed changes by our other colleagues, we wanted to ensure that we're being representative of those potential changes as well, that I think some of my colleagues have signed on to those amendments.
Okay. And then you have another change here to provide at a minimum monthly public presentations to the governing body. The current language says provide regular and then comma monthly written updates, but you're changing that to provide at a minimum monthly public presentations to the governing body. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So for example, similar to the way we had Marisol and Ms. Ladd present to us tonight, we would request that the chart committee present to the governing body at least once a month. Similar presentation format, the governing body schedule agenda allows for it. Believe that's necessary not only for the governing body to get an update, but to be fully transparent with the community, and the community can understand what the committee is working on at that point in time.
Okay, and then another change is on page 4, number 11, currently says 3 at-large members of the Santa Fe community selected with a particular focus on adding to the diversity of the committee. This amendment, I believe, would change that to 4, from 3 to 4. Did you want to speak to that?
Sure. We felt that we need to ensure that there is appropriate representation. And when you have certain criteria being looked for and expertise that might have some community members feeling like they don't meet the level of criteria that this committee is calling for. So for example, historians, not everybody is a certified historian. You know, we might have a community member that has no expertise, but they are just as invested in this community as somebody with some type of education experience. And we want to ensure that there is plenty of space for everybody at the table.
Okay, so you just want to make sure that there are more of those kinds of people that's why you're adding to 4 from 3.
Correct.
Okay. And then another one of the changes that your amendment makes, the 3 counselors, again on page 4, it's the current reading, number 6, 1 individual with national museum or other professional historical interpretation experience. And this amendment would strike 1 individual with National Museum and insert instead 1 individual with New Mexico Museum or other professional historical interpretation experience. Do you want to speak to that one?
Sure. And I think probably my colleagues would agree that New Mexico is a very unique and different place. And just because you have national experience doesn't mean you have the experience in addressing the historical trauma and issues that we are currently dealing with here. So with that being said, we want to ensure that that individual fully understands New Mexico.
So just a quick question. So if we had somebody from the Smithsonian Museums in Washington, D.C. who had retired here, or we had somebody from the Native American Museum in Washington, D.C. who retired here, particular expertise about how you make historical representations accessible to the general public, that person you don't see as being valuable to this group with this
They might. I mean, given the criteria you listed, given this individual, for example, might have worked for the Smithsonian, the American Indian Smithsonian Institution, they might have that expertise of New Mexico history. We strongly believe that you have to understand New Mexico history. I think this is a critical component of this. If you can't come and step in and read about what's happened here, it's bigger than that. The issue is much bigger than that because there's history that is not documented in some senses. It's verbal, it's oral history that individual needs to have been present to fully understand. And sometimes it's just that physical, spiritual presence needed to be here. I think the situation that we're dealing with, it is critical that we have an individual that fully understands the situation we're dealing with, because
completely agree, Counselor.
Yeah.
But this would not allow for somebody who had retired here with National Museum experience. You're cutting that out.
If they have no, I don't. I'm not. Absolutely not. I commented on that and I said, given that individual worked for the Smithsonian, they might have that expertise because we have large tribal representation that they might have worked on or worked while working at the Smithsonian. So I think you have to set the parameters in regards to what is your experience? What do you know about New Mexico? And if it's somebody that has none, I think that would eliminate them.
So if this read 1 individual with National Museum experience related to New Mexico history, would that then suffice? Because what you're doing is your amendment strikes national and inserts instead New Mexico. So you'd have to be a New Mexico museum official, not a national museum official formally.
Madam Chair, on
Right.
that
Well,
point,
Yeah,
if I
Councilor
may,
Rivera. Yeah,
thank you. If I may, real quick, I think when we looked at it, your example is something that I think we thought about. We figured they would fit into a different area, such as number 3. So it's not to exclude them, you know, if somebody with that kind of expertise came on, but we thought they would fit into a different area of expertise. We felt it was important to have somebody with the New Mexico history and museum background on the committee.
okay. Councilor Villarreal, you had a
Well,
point.
just on that point, the way I read it, and even if we changed it to New Mexico, it still wouldn't preclude somebody that has professional historic interpretation experience. So if we change it to New Mexico, I'd be okay with that because it's an individual with New Mexico Museum or other professional historical interpretation experience.
It just, to me, it shrinks it to New Mexico. So I think that's something just to think about as we go on, because I think that was the idea behind this, is that, and because I think we do have those kinds of people in our community who have experience with national museums and some of the national museums that capture our history. So completely agree with Councilor Garcia that, you know, we want people who are familiar with the history here and who can also help make the interpretation experience accessible to a wide variety of folks. So anyway, I won't belabor that. Yeah, I think that is basically what this amendment does. Am I correct? Have we forgotten anything?
I'll defer to Councilor Rivera.
I think, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
I think Councilor Garcia answered most of it. The last thing I wanted to say was on page 4, lines 19 through 21, we do make an amendment to try to delete those 2 lines. The reason, if there are any legal questions, they can refer to the city attorney's office. I think they can request to have an attorney there during meetings if they think it's important. And the other one, the individual with mediator dispute, I think we're hiring somebody with resolution training that's going to head up the committee. So we didn't see the need to have that. And even at 19, I think the committee is extremely large, but we did our best to honor, I think, what the sponsor was trying to do and still do what we thought was best and limit the committee to a few. Now with the other amendments, it may increase or go back up to 21, but that's where we were coming from.
Yeah, it's hard to get all the different varieties of folks that you want to have part of this conversation and then, keep it small. I think that's the fight that we're seeing. Okay. Councilor Garcia, I believe you still have the floor. Were there other amendments that you wanted to speak to?
Not at the moment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Other members of the committee want to talk about any of the other amendments that have been presented here?
Madam Chair, to keep this clean, can we just focus on this amendment and go on to the other ones once we address either questions or clarifications on this particular amendment and maybe even on this amendment before we move on to the next one?
Sure. And I do think it's an interesting point whether, this amendment should be broken up into the different ideas here or whether the committee, for instance, agrees with everything that's in here. So that's something to consider. Councilor Villarreal, did you have other thoughts about?
I went through this one and I actually agree with all of them. The only thing I'm concerned about is when we look at the other amendments, they actually contradict this one. So we have to figure that out. Although I'm in favor of reducing the numbers, And I will talk about that a little bit more even. I mean, I was even thinking 15 if we could. And the reason why I say that is because right now the state has the Racial Equity Commission or Council, and there's, I think, 20, I want to say there's about 25, maybe 20 to 25. And it's really challenging to get not just consensus, but deciding what direction, what topics they want to pick. It's not very easy to get everybody on board, especially with busy people. So I'm in favor of continuously trying to reduce this. I think we could start at 19 right now with this amendment, and I'm okay with that. I just think we need to consider the possibility of having it smaller, because really hard getting people all together trying to work on something with that large of a body. So that's all I have for this one. I think all the adjustments or changes that they're proposing make sense to me at this time.
Other thoughts on this amendment? Counselor Cassett Sanchez, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, you know, some of these I don't see a problem with, and I'm fine with. There are a couple that I don't think I agree with. One that I'm struggling with is the timeline. I'm kind of two minds about that one with the establishing, I believe it's I think it's number 3, propose guidelines and make recommendations for monuments, remembrances, or works of art for the Santa Fe Plaza, beginning with the Soldiers Monument within 6 months of the committee's first meeting. And the reason that I'm struggling with this one is trying to find that balance between how much direction we give and the understanding that this committee is a little bit different than some of the other committees that we have been working with, considering that we are looking at such complex, really rich topics that might take a lot of unpacking. And there might be other things that need to be discussed and determined before some of those resolutions or some of those solutions come to the top. I think that's where my hesitation with this one comes from is how much do we set the timeline and how much do we say, here are the goals. We have done our due diligence in making a selection of this group, and we trust you to figure out what this process needs to look like for yourselves. I've been doing a lot of research on some different truth and reconciliation commissions. I was speaking with a couple individuals who do work in restorative justice about this. And that was one of the big topics of conversation is the setting of the terms. But I do see that there's a balance. We have to set parameters. We need to say, this is what we would really like to see out of this, while also allowing for some of the flexibility to let the process unfold a bit more. So that's my concern with that one. The monthly presentations, I feel might be a little too frequent because it takes so much time to prepare a presentation that I don't want the committee to be spending so much of their time preparing to present to the governing body once a month, as opposed to doing the work. So I would suggest the written presentations, and maybe we look at monthly, get the written reports, and then maybe look at quarterly presentations to really allow the work to be done and not just the admin piece. So that would be a suggestion that I would make to that one. And then, yeah, just still wanting to make sure the concept of the museum experience and the different variety of people. I think this also does start to speak to how are we selecting the committee. As a council, we do have approval, correct? I mean, it's as with every committee, we approve it has to come to us and we vote it up or down. Am I accurate? Am I correct in that understanding?
I think that's correct. But I don't think we get to say, no, we want this person, not that person.
Correct. Right. Okay. Just want to make sure as we are talking about what this process looks like. So that's one that I would like to have a little bit more discussion of. I think, as everybody's mentioned, there's other amendments coming through. I must admit, I would have a hard time voting on this one right now, knowing that there are other amendments that contradict it, and that discussion, because how does that change our ability to be looking at that? For example, well, we'll talk about the other amendments, but there's some pieces in one of Councilor Abeta's that I really want to advocate for, which is the member of the Mayor's Youth Advisory Board or somebody that is nominated by the Mayor's Youth Advisory Board coming to the table. So I do see some other aspects of that amendment that I want to make sure are represented as well. So again, that just goes back to the question of how do we do this? Regarding Councilor Villarreal's comment about reducing the number, I think that's something that I'd be happy to explore. And maybe we look at, some of those areas where we have 3 individuals, do we, break down to 2, where we have 2, we bring it down to 1. And I think that can be a really important conversation. And how do we balance that representation as well as management of different individuals coming in, while also still recognizing that within these different groups, it's not like there are homogenous opinions across the board. And so how do we capture all of the different conversation and representation, even within the different groups that we are trying to represent? I think that's going to be a complexity that we are going to need to struggle with. And maybe that's where those at-large members start to come in a little bit more and discuss them. So those are my thoughts on this amendment in particular. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Villarreal.
That Councilwoman Casas Sanchez brought up. I think in terms of the presentations, I'm just letting you know, like Councilor Garcia, it would be pretty hard to do a monthly presentation. And let me tell you why, because we're struggling with like just getting through the process through the task force. And if we would have had to do a monthly presentation, there would be nothing to present to you all. So I think we were just talking about that, ways to have presentations so that you all get updated on the task force. And we decided, what did we decide? I think like it's basically quarterly. So I just want you to be cognizant of that, because a monthly presentation is probably not realistic, considering how much we're trying to get people together and actually have conversations and get through a lot of trust issues. I think we will. So I think that's going to take time. So I'm wondering if there's a way to reword that so there allows for flexibility.
Councilor Villarreal, I would, I have similar concerns about that. I think it's too often, and I don't want them to be spending so much time on the presentations that they don't do the work that we want them to do. And so I would trust them with coming to us at regular intervals, and we could even say it, that we would like regular presentations and let them decide, what that means, and that they come, or some sort of general language that would say that we want to be kept up to date as there are things to be briefed upon. So I think there's language certainly that we could do that would leave that kind of up to them, but also imply that we don't want it to go 6 months without hearing from them.
On that point, Madam Chair.
Yes,
I think, and I understand where Councilor Villarreal is coming from with her experience on the task force, but we got to remember, once these committees get up and running, they're going to be running. Right now, the task force is kind of getting up and starting to run, but soon you should be getting lots of work going. And that's what we expect to be happening with this chart committee. And that's where we want to, at minimum, set some timeframes where they come and deliver reports to us. I think maybe there's some differences of opinion in regards to presentations, because I would be perfectly fine with them coming before the governing body and within 5 minutes saying, this committee met, this committee met, this committee met, we're working on this. Any questions? Bam, next. We don't need to go through an in-depth hour presentation. So I think that's maybe where the differing of presentations is at, because we as a governing body need to ensure that we're well informed of what's going on with this committee, because there's going to be lots of questions from the community, lots of feedback from the community, and I in particular would like to ensure that I know what's going on, because it's going to be hard to keep up with them once this committee gets going, and especially with the anticipation of the development of subcommittees being introduced and developed. I'm not going to be able to keep track of every time a subcommittee meets what's going on, and that's where I think the intention was monthly. I'm open to bi-monthly. I think quarterly, you're getting too late in that sense, where 2 months ago we did this. No, I think we need to have real-time information. And so maybe set the expectation with the committee. You don't have to spend a week on developing a presentation. Just give us the nuts and bolts of what's happening and what's upcoming. That way, should the governing body want to participate in some manner or keep an eye on it and inform their constituents, we're able to do so. So I think that was at least my perspective of the monthly. It wasn't a monthly 1 hour presentation to the governing body. Absolutely, that was not my intention with that. And maybe Councilor Rivera can speak further to that since he's a co-sponsor.
Yeah, thank you. Councilor Garcia, is it okay with you, Councilor Romero-Worth?
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. So I think Councilor Garcia has heard the concerns of both Councilwoman Villarreal, Councilwoman Cassett-Sanchez, and you, Madam Chair. And we'll get back together, the sponsors, and see if we can tweak up that language a little bit and see if we can find something that'll be a little bit easier for everyone to get through the process. So I'll make sure that we get together with Jesse to try to figure out how we're going to do that.
Okay. All right. So Councilor Villarreal, you wanted to, I don't know if we want to, I think we've commented on this. I don't know that we're ready to take action on it. But I'll leave that to the committee here.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
I think all these amendments may need some retweaking throughout the whole process. So I'll make a recommendation that we move this forward without a recommendation, just move it forward so that we can make some necessary changes and then move it on to the next committee for further review.
Okay, so we're making a motion to move this amendment forward without a recommendation.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll make changes and present those hopefully at the next committee meeting that it comes up at.
I will second that motion.
Okay.
There's a previous motion on the floor. Can we?
No, but we're taking amendment. We're taking a motion on the amendment. This is, okay. And so the motion that's on the floor is with regard to the bill itself.
With that, Madam Chair, just Councilwoman Cassett-Sanchez will also look at the item number 3 as well and see if we can tweak that as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Councilor Rivera, I also think the National Museum versus New Mexico Museum, maybe you just say museum.
Okay, we'll take a look at it.
Yeah, and get rid of National or New Mexico. Maybe we just look for somebody who's got museum experience and obviously with the proper understanding of the history, not, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll look at all those.
All right, so Jennifer, can you call the roll on
I have a discussion.
Oh,
after
sorry, Councilor Villarreal.
The majority of them I agree with, and if you can just tweak some certain things, I think that would make sense. The other thing I wanted to comment on is adding the at-large from 3 to 4, and I would rather do that than add a specific youth component to this or a county appointment component, because then we can have more flexibility for 4 with an idea that we should be looking at youth. We should be looking at somebody that, say, is an immigrant or a African American. I just think that we're like limiting ourselves when we start continuously narrowing it down more and more. So that's why I'm okay with adding the at-large to go to 4, with the idea that yes, we could get a youth representation. Yes, we could get an immigrant representation. And it's not so much about someone having academic or some kind of experience, but it's really the lived experience that I care about. So that's why I would support this rather than trying to be narrow and starting to pick at like specific representations, because I feel like this is already narrowing it to the point where we're creating binaries like Hispanic and Native American, when we are very much connected to each other. So I will talk about that in a minute, but let's go ahead and I guess vote for this first.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I guess I think we definitely need to call out youth, because I think sometimes we forget. And I do think they should be part of this conversation. So I hear you, but I think there are certain folks like we have identified that definitely need to be called out, and not just put in a other category. So, all right. Are we ready to take a vote on no recommendation on this amendment while it gets worked on? All right, looks like we are. Jennifer, can you call the roll?
Yes, Councillor Garcia,
Yes.
Councillor Rivera,
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councillor Cassett Sanchez,
Yes.
and Chair Romero Worth.
Yes. All right. Now, is there another amendment that the committee?
Madam Chair, you went on mute.
Sorry. Is there another amendment that the committee is interested in discussing? We have two others that haven't been spoken to directly, and then the one of the mayor's, which I don't know, does the committee want to act on that one as well?
I will make a motion to not approve that amendment.
Second.
All right, do we have discussion on that? Jennifer, do you want to call the roll on that?
Hold on, Madam Chair, if I can. So,
Yep, sorry about that.
Just in trying to think it out, then the person we would have to establish then another committee to review and evaluate the nominations. Is that the plan?
That was one suggestion.
Councilor Garcia, since you made the motion, I'm trying to figure out where we would go to pick the list of people. And for the task force, we had about 66. I imagine there's going to be quite a bit more for this committee. So what's the plan if this is not adopted, or the suggestion, I guess?
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Garcia, sorry.
Well, I mean, with the way the proposed resolution currently sits, I mean, whomever is applied or recommended goes through a process. I am assuming the mayor determines what it looks like. What I'm proposing and will be proposing, I'm finalizing the language, is to set up an independent review body that will be demographically made up of the makeup of the city of Santa Fe and surrounding Pueblo and indigenous communities. They would then make the recommendations to the mayor, and then the mayor would ultimately review and make his recommendations to the governing body. That's going to be my proposal. Now, if that I'm hoping the governing body would agree with that and approve that recommendation, approve that amendment, but that's just something I'm going to be putting forth.
So on one hand, we're talking about how important this is and how quickly we need to move on it, and really establishing another committee to review and evaluate the nominations is going to take another 3 months to get through the process.
No, I don't think so. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Councilor Garcia, if it's okay with the chair.
Yes, it's okay.
I don't believe, Councilor Rivera, that it would take that long. I think if we act on both, we can actually let the community know that, hey, we are going to be taking applications for the chart committee. While once upon adoption of this resolution, we immediately start moving the governing body, the community, any interested organizations start putting forth names for this review committee. We then give ourselves a 2-week timetable to have applications in. We review applications over a week, so that's 3 weeks. Meanwhile, we're already getting applications for these folks in. So once these folks, 3 weeks in, once this body is established, they can quickly then review the applications, give themselves whatever, we can determine what that timetable looks like, 2 weeks to review and approve, make the recommendations to the mayor. So I think ultimately that potential time frame from adoption of the resolution to potential acceptance or offering of these positions to the community can be about 6-7 weeks, if that. I think I agree, we need to act quickly, but we also need to ensure we're moving forward in a process that allows us to move forward with the buy-in and the credibility of the community. I think the way this resolution stands now, there is a lot of approvals of the mayor, and I understand that's the way our city code is currently written, but we can be flexible with that in the sense by developing a steering committee that reviews applications. We allow for the committee to determine who their chairs are. We want, in some instances, we want to try to pull ourselves out of the process as much as this. I'm already getting feedback from the community that there's already identified people selected. We already know who we're going to select on this committee, which is not the truth. And I think we can all agree that that's not the truth, but we need to ensure that the community understands that we're going to have a completely fair and transparent process with this. And the way we do that is by creating this independent committee. The city of Albuquerque did the same thing. The way that the city of Albuquerque did their process is similar process in the sense they brought together a group of steering committee members that were experts that reviewed applications for their overall committee members. And I think that was a great process. I liked that idea. I recommended it months ago to the mayor, and I still strongly believe that that's how we do it. We need to do it in a fair and transparent manner and pull ourselves out.
Counselor, before I go to Council Villarreal, I'm just curious, who would appoint the steering committee? Do you run into the same problem? I mean, right. At some point, we're the elected officials. You do have to trust us. We are, the resolution does indicate the type of people who should be on this. We're trying to make it inclusive. We're trying to make sure that you've got a variety of voice. You've got a full spectrum of voices who will participate, that again is inclusive. I don't know how much further you can go. I'm very interested in what Albuquerque did. I'll look into that. But I'm not sure appointing a committee to appoint a committee gets you what you're looking for.
And Madam Chair, on that point, I completely agree that our constituents and our community should trust us. But I think unfortunately they don't right now. And we need to have them build that trust back up with us, that we will allow for a process where the community knows that nothing is predetermined. And I think there's a lot of that in unfortunately in the minds of some of our community members that this has already been predetermined. This committee,
Okay.
who the individuals have been selected. It's okay.
Okay,
yield the
I hear
floor,
you. Counselor Cassett Sanchez, you have your hand up.
I actually am waiting to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Counselor Villarreal, and then Counselor Cassett
Just on
Sanchez.
that
Sorry.
point, I hear you about an independent review committee. However, for the Albuquerque model, the mayor actually appointed the independent review committee to make selections for their committee. So it ended up still being the mayor in their case. So I don't know if it's getting to where you're thinking that would create more transparency. And I'm wondering, with this amendment that is being proposed about how 8 members of the committee shall be persons nominated by members of the governing body, if that helps with the process of narrowing down the selection and making it more spread out with the governing body versus having committee chairs make the selections and or just the mayor. And I don't know if that's a question for Councilor Garcia, but it just to be aware of that I hear you about the independent review committee. However, the mayor in Albuquerque elected them. So how do we then balance it out so that the governing body is part of this potential selections? Like we let you all look at the applications for the task force and weighed in what you thought or candidates you thought was strong. So I'm just wondering if that process could work here.
All right, I'm going to take that as a comment. Counselor Cassett Sanchez, what is your question or thoughts?
Yeah. Sorry, muted myself while I was talking. I had that similar question of, it almost feels like we're going into this rabbit hole of, well, we can't be trusted to appoint the committee, so we're going to appoint the committee, but then they've been appointed by somehow connected. So I think one of my bigger concerns, and Councilor Villarreal brought it up very much, is how is the entire governing body able to really put their input in here? And that's the piece that I'm looking at, because it's true. We are elected officials. We are elected to represent the community. And I know we've all received, emails that have been expressing a frustration with us, but we've also received emails. I know I've received emails and spoken with constituents expressing still a ability to communicate with us and understanding what a complicated situation this is. I think that it's very frequent of us to just look at some of the negative pieces. And, I agree with Councilor Garcia that we do need to pull ourselves out of this process. From the beginning, I very much advocated to the mayor that I didn't believe that any of us sitting on council should be sitting on that committee for that exact reason. But at the end of the day, we also need to make this decision. And I think it is about finding that balance of how do we make the decision of who's going to be sitting on here while still gathering the input of the governing body. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to hear more about Councilor Abeta's proposal at Finance, because I would really like to hear more about what his thoughts are, or as Councilor Villarreal brought up, the way that the Public Health and Safety Committee was done to be looking at, to be gathering our input. And it's a little different because it's not divided by district at this point, but I do think that somehow figuring out that process is important. Again, because there are so many different ideas here, I will, if we pull this to a vote, I'm not going to move it forward with a recommendation or move it forward without a recommendation, because there are just all of these little pieces and components that we have to discuss and to be looking at. This might be, at the end of the day, the final decision piece. This might be a good result, but I do want to hear a little bit more how it filters down to the rest of the governing body. It may not be, but I honestly, until I hear a little bit more about that full decision process, I think that, it needs some work. But I'm also not not against the three chairs being the ones that actually sit at that table to help to make that decision either. But I do want to make sure that input is provided by the rest of the governing body at the same time.
Okay, Councilor Rivera, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've heard a couple times, I just want to clarify that I'm hearing this right, that that everyone realizes that there'll be no city councilors on this committee, right? Or the mayor themselves. This is a committee made up of no governing body members at all. So this is just to review and evaluate the nominations, and then, you know, councilors based on Councilor Abeta's amendment would have a say in at least one of the members. So, you know, clearly those nominations would have to go to the rest of the governing body to make a selection. The other thing was back to timeliness. In order to get a committee together, I imagine it'll take a separate resolution, which would be still needed to be introduced in November. We have limited meetings in November, so it would have to go probably through the process all of through November, perhaps be decided on in December, maybe January, depending on how things go. And then the selection process for the committee to appoint or to evaluate the nominations, I think would then take, depending on the amount of nominations, could take at least another 3 or 4 weeks. So I think we are looking at least 3 or 4 months. And I understand your idea about being transparent, but I'm also trying to be as quick as possible. So just wanted to make that comment, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. And I would just add to that I believe, and again, I think we need to hear from Councilor Abeta, but I believe his amendment is that the members of the governing body would nominate somebody. So that would mean that they're just putting them into a pool of people for consideration. It's really this resolution that's going to drive, you know, who's sitting around the table. It says we want one of this kind of person, one of this kind of person, and, you know, 3 of people who are more at large who don't fit into any of the specified types of people. So just to make that clarification. Councilor Garcia, and then we should probably move on. It is getting late.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to Councilor Rivera's point, we wouldn't need to introduce a separate resolution. You can introduce an amendment that adds language to this resolution that would establish this during committee. So I completely disagree with that. We don't need to do that. Okay. My second point is, and this is my sheer justification for voting no on this amendment, is there is not Indigenous or Native American representation that is going to be selecting this committee. We have to understand that this is not a normal committee that we are developing. We have to look at it in the perspective that we need to ensure that we have the buy-in from everybody. And look at it in the senses of we're selecting a jury. One side gets to ensure that they're equally representative, another side gets to ensure that they're equally represented, and everybody agrees on the final committee. And when there is no Native American or Indigenous representation that's going to be selecting the committee members, you're not going to have any buy-in at all. So with that is my main point for not wanting to approve this. Now, if there was additional members that had Native American representation, sure, but that is extremely critical, and it's not there.
Okay, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, and then really, guys, we do need to move on here.
Okay, just one quick clarification. People will be nominated for this committee, correct, by other individuals? Is that how this works?
Anybody can nominate people.
They can nominate themselves and people will nominate other people. Councilor Villarreal, why are you saying no?
Because I'm going to make an amendment that I don't think we should nominate. If people want to be on this committee, they should apply just like any other committee, but that's another topic for later.
Well, but if it's a combination of, okay, it's another topic, but if people nominated them and then they applied, do we get kind of the combo of representative trust of the committee as well as them showing their interest in putting that application forward? Okay, just wanted to clarify that piece because I think that's also another component as we start to think about in this conversation. Councilor Garcia, I think you're right. You know, there is the challenge that nobody on this council has any Indigenous representation or can represent the Indigenous population. And maybe that is part of it, is that somebody is pulled into that group as that conversation, recognizing where our shortfalls from the diversity in our council fall. Maybe that is where we look at for that. So, thank you.
Okay, but the resolution, I think, does call to include Indigenous people. And so whether or not Indigenous people are picking people doesn't mean that Indigenous people won't be represented in the resolution. I'm gonna stop this conversation now. Jennifer, would you please call the roll on this motion and maybe we can restate it. We are voting right now not to adopt the mayor's amendment that says that the committee will be appointed by that nominations will be evaluated by himself and the 3 chairs of the major governing body committees.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councilor Jamie Casas Sanchez.
No.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
No, we need Native American and Indigenous representation selecting who they want.
You want to, Councilor?
I mean, yes.
You
I
want to vote
apologize.
yes?
I apologize. Yes.
Thank you.
It's
Scratch
a tricky
that.
one.
Yeah, we're moving to deny the amendment.
Correct.
Councilor Chris Rivera.
No, not until I see a substitution.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
No. All right, so that motion fails. Does anybody want to make an alternative motion? Or do you, and you don't have to. That's the other thing. We can just not make a statement on this. All right, we're going to move on. Is there any other amendment that the committee wants? There are 2 amendments by Councilor Abeyta. Would you rather consider those when Councilor Abeyta is in a committee and present to talk about them? I'm seeing some heads nod. Or is there one of Councilor Abeyta's, 1 or 2, 1 or both, that you would like to talk about? We sort of touched a little bit on at least one of them.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Villarreal.
The amendment that had to do with adding an individual to be nominated by the Santa Fe Board of Commissioners. Does anyone know about why that would be the case and why we'd add that special language for another individual to be appointed?
I have no idea why this is coming forward. I mean, I don't know whether they asked or whether he thinks that's an important voice to capture. I don't know. That's why it'd be good to hear from him.
And then the other one was to strike 3, let's see. In the future, it's so much better to do track changes on the actual amendment to show, I know this is the procedure we follow, but it's completely confusing. And to try to explain your amendments with the way it's written, it's hard. And I think the way we've been able to get through it in the past is having track changes options to see
The problem is when you have multiple amendments, I think, but I hear you. I mean, I printed it and I wrote and I marked up a printed copy. So the other amendment, at least 8 members of the committee shall be persons nominated by the members of the governing body. Looks like he wants 2 to be based in Santa Fe County. 1 individual with mediator dispute resolution training and experience. Oh no, striking that.
Madam Chair, that's the other amendment. I'm talking about the one that just has 2 changes. It's the adding a Santa Fe County Board Commissioner nomination and let's see, page 4, line 22, from 3 to 2.
Oh, yeah.
Counselor,
Page,
it's reducing the number of at-large members and taking one of those at-large and giving it to a Santa Fe County commission nomination.
there you
That's
go.
what I'm seeing.
Yep, you're right. All right, I think we need Counselor Beta to talk about this. So I would suggest that we don't do anything with it. And then the other one was the one I was trying to describe. Jesse, you have your hand up. Was that an old hand or a new hand?
Madam Chair, councilors, I was just going to mention that Councilor Beta did not provide a reasoning for adding in a member of the Board of Commissioners. So if you have questions about that, probably be best to ask him.
Okay. All right. So, and then his other amendment, this is the one that adds a Mayor's Youth Advisory Board member. I don't know. What do you want to do on this? Should we save this for an opportunity when Councilor Abeta is here to talk it through?
Yes, I would prefer to wait to be able to ask questions of Counselor Abeta. And just from our previous conversations, there's been, you know, amendments that I had interpreted differently than the sponsors had intended. So I would like to be able to speak to be able to ask questions and receive answers on those.
Madam
Okay.
Chair,
Yes, Councilor Villarreal.
so why do we even look at potential amendments for people that are council members that cannot or do not show up for committee meetings or even have an ability to discuss them when they're not here? And
That's
so
it.
why do we even, I'm really confused by that, because in the last committee meeting, we actually had the sponsors of those amendments show up to a finance committee to talk about their amendments, and they took the time to do that. So I'm just like wondering what the hell.
Yeah, I think, you know, we are looking at our process and ways to improve it, and living in real time, some of the examples of why our process could use some work. Because I mean, well, this is a longer conversation, and again, the hour's late. I don't want to get into it, but yeah. So I would. So we do have a motion on the floor to move to approve this bill, understanding that there are amendments that need to be made, that will be made. And so I guess I'd like to go forward with that if everybody is ready to do that.
Madam Chair, I just had to make a couple statements about the amendments I'm considering that I have
Okay.
that have not been written up, and I'll get them to you as soon as I can solidify language. And one of them was the idea that the way people get considered for this, I mean, sure, I mean, anyone could give us a nomination saying, oh, so-and-so would be great. However, if that person wants to apply and be considered, or if that person wants to be considered, they need to apply, whether it's just a regular letter of interest in why they want to serve to make it simplified. I'm not always in favor of always requiring people to provide us with resumes per se, but maybe that's, you know, that's optional. But I do think that the way we state it now, that we are accepting nominations really convolutes it. And so I'm going to make an amendment to that. There's some language changes and wording that I want to adjust. The other thing was about who is eligible to apply. I know there was conversation in the Public Works Utilities Committee about that they don't have to be from the city of Santa Fe and it just ends there. But I do think we should say the people that are eligible are folks from the city of Santa Fe County, and or New Mexico. I don't know. I just want to think about that a little bit more, but instead of I just think we need to change that. And no one put an amendment for that particular language that came out of the discussion for Public Works. So I'm not sure why. The other thing was about chairs and how they're selected. And I think the others is just the sheer number of people that we're considering. And as I was saying before, like putting groups and putting labels on particular groups that are supposed to be representative. And I agree with my colleague about them not being homogenous. Like we can't assume that everybody's homogenous just because they have Hispano background. And so what I was struggling with is the way this was worded about representatives that are representing the Hispanic culture and civic groups and the Native representation. And I know we want all of that. It's just that it creates this binary that has for so long created a division that's already, I don't know, it creates this division that people already think is there, which it isn't. Like we're like mixed people. And that's what's really hard for me. It's like we are mixed mestizos, and to say you're Hispanic and you're Native is really hard. Just because I don't belong to a tribe doesn't mean I don't have indigenous blood. So I'm struggling with that. And I don't know how to make it so that we make sure that we have these cultural and civic groups represented, because we want that. At the same time, we know that they're mixed. And so the binary there bothers me, and I'm not sure what to do about that yet. So if anyone has any ideas, that would be helpful. And I think that, yeah, I want us to try to be realistic about how many members we should have on this committee. So I'll stop there, and I'll be making some amendments as we go on to the next committee, so that we
Okay.
can have more amendments to deal with.
Okay. Are we ready then to vote on this bill, recognizing that more amendments will be made as it continues to move forward? It does have to pass a council committee in order to go to governing body.
And it hasn't passed one yet?
I don't know what happened to it at Public Works, Public Utilities, Councilor Garcia, Councilor Rivera. Did you pass, Councilor Rivera as the chair, did you pass this?
No, it's going back to a Public Works Committee once we had a chance to make the amendments.
Okay, well, I don't see that it should come back here. We're just lengthening the process. We only have one more meeting in this calendar year. So, and I know it's going to finance, and I know 3 of the 5 of us sit on finance, and 2 of the 5 of us sit on Public Works and Public Utilities. So I don't know. The other thing is, if you don't want, the motion on the floor is to adopt this resolution. If you don't want to do that, then we should vote that motion down and put a new motion in. Or we can move it forward, recognizing that it does need more changes. So maybe the best thing to do is to vote the motion to approve it down, and vote it no recommendation for the moment. So, okay. So Jennifer, can you call the roll? I think the motion on the table is to approve the resolution.
Madam Chair, could I just withdraw my motion?
Yeah.
I believe it's my oh yeah, it is. Was it your motion? Yes.
It
And
is.
I was the second, right? No.
Councilor Casa Sanchez is the second.
Okay, yeah, sure. You can do that. Why don't you withdraw it?
I'll withdraw my motion.
And I will withdraw my second.
Okay, and then we'll entertain a new motion. Thank you, sorry.
Move to approve to move it forward without recommendation.
Second.
All right. Jennifer, can you call the roll, please?
Sorry, just one second. Councilor Garcia.
No worries.
I'm going to abstain.
Councilor Rivera.
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal.
Just so I'm clear, this is saying that we are moving it forward with no recommendation to the
Correct.
next committee or governing
Correct.
body. Okay, yes.
Councillor Cassett Sanchez
Yes.
and Chair Romero Worth.
Yes. Okay, so let's see, let me get back to my agenda. Jennifer, help me. What's next on our agenda? Matters from the committee,
From staff.
from staff. Do you have any?
I do not.
All right, matters from the committee? Matters from the chair. Our next meeting, Jennifer, is December
Number 2nd.
December 2nd, and that will be the last meeting of the Quality of Life Committee for this calendar year. And yeah, I think that's it. So thank you, everybody, for the conversation, and we'll see you at the next